The snow had been falling for hours, not loud or violent, just steady enough to erase footprints as quickly as they were made. A circle of men stood in the open yard between two leaning timber buildings, their coats dusted white, their faces weathered into expressions that suggested they had seen worse and learned not to care. Somewhere a horse stamped its hoof, the dull thud muffled by ice. No one spoke at first. Silence did the work words usually did in this place. She stood at the center of it all, still, small. Her dress was the color of old linen cinched tight at the waist, the hem darkened by wet snow. A metal paint can covered her head completely, rusted around the rim, streaked with dried green and gray. It hung slightly crooked as if placed without care. When she breathed, the sound echoed faintly inside the metal, a hollow rasp that some of the men found amusing. A few chuckled. One spat into the snow. The cowboy watched from the edge of the crowd. He had arrived in town less than an hour earlier, drawn by the promise of warmth and a meal, not spectacle. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, his coat worn thin at the elbows, his hat pulled low. He kept his hands loose at his sides, fingers stiff from cold. He had seen deals made over cattle, land, even guns slick with blood. This was different. This felt wrong in a way that refused to settle. A man stepped forward, clearing his throat like he was about to sell a mule. "No trouble," he said, raising his voice. "She don't talk, don't look at you, don't ask for." Laughter rippled through the group, thin and quick. Strong enough to work, weak enough not to run. The woman did not move. Snow gathered on her shoulders, melting slowly into the fabric. Her hands were clasped in front of her, knuckles red, fingers trembling just enough to notice if you were looking close. The cowboy noticed. He also noticed how straight she stood, how her back did not bow even now. There was something deliberate in her stillness, like a choice rather than defeat. Coins changed hands nearby, small bets placed for sport. Someone tossed out a number. Another shook his head. The man selling her shrugged, bored already. "Dollar," he said finally, like he was ending an argument with himself. $1 and she's gone. The word hung there, absurd and heavy. $1. The cowboy felt heat rise in his chest, sharp and unexpected. He thought of the miles behind him, of nights sleeping under open sky, of the quiet rules he lived by because the world had given him no others. He did not think of himself as kind. He thought of himself as fair when he could manage it. This was not fair by any measure he recognized. Before he knew he was moving, his boots crunched forward. The crowd shifted, curious now. He reached into his coat, pulled free a single worn bill, folded and unfolded so many times it was soft as cloth. He held it out. The seller took it without ceremony, barely looking at the cowboy's face. "Your problem now," the man said, already turning away. A murmur followed, some disappointment, some relief. The circle loosened. Interest faded as quickly as it had formed. To them, the moment was over. To the cowboy, it had just begun. He stood in front of the woman, close enough to see the flakes melting on the metal can, close enough to hear her breath echo again. He did not reach for her, he did not speak. He only waited, unsure of what came next, aware of the eyes still watching from a distance. The woman shifted her weight just slightly. Snow slid from her sleeve. Somewhere behind him, someone laughed and walked away. The cowboy turned and started toward the road. After a moment, he heard footsteps behind him, careful and slow. She was following. Each step seemed measured, as if she were counting them, trusting the ground only a little at a time. He adjusted his pace without thinking, matching hers. The town receded behind them, its noise swallowed by falling snow. They walked in silence, the world narrowed to breath and movement. The paint can knocked softly against her collarbone with each step. The sound settled into a rhythm, almost like a clock. The cowboy felt the weight of that sound press against him, marking time he could not take back. He wondered who she had been before this, before the can, before the dollar. He wondered what kind of town decided silence was safer than truth. Mostly, he wondered why her presence felt like a question he could not ignore. They reached the edge of the yard where the wind cut sharper. He stopped and turned. For the first time, he stood directly in front of her, blocking the path. The crowd was far enough now that no one paid them mind. Snow drifted between them, quiet as ash. He lifted a hand, hesitated, then spoke, his voice low and rough from disuse. "You don't have to follow," he said. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then from inside the paint can, a voice emerged, soft, steady, human. "I know." The single word landed between them like a struck match, small and bright. And the cowboy felt with sudden certainty that the bargain he had made was not the one he thought. The sound of her voice lingered, warmer than the air, carrying something that did not belong in this place. He searched for the right response and found none. Instead, he reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. She did not. His fingers touched the cold rim of the can, metal biting into his skin. Up close, he could see where it had scraped her hair, where rust had stained the fabric of her collar. He lifted it just enough to let light spill inside. Her breath caught a sharp intake, then steadied. Snowflakes drifted in, melting against her cheeks. He raised the can fully and held it at his side. For the first time, he saw her face. It was thinner than he expected, eyes dark and alert, lashes clumped with moisture. There were bruises, old and new, but also a composure that held firm beneath them. She met his gaze without flinching. Around them, the world felt paused. The wind softened, even the snow seemed to slow. The cowboy felt an unfamiliar tightening in his chest, not pity, not desire, but recognition. He had known men broken by less, had seen them fold inward and disappear. She was still here. "Thank you," she said, not as gratitude, but as acknowledgement, like nomming a fact. He nodded once, unsure what he was agreeing to. He realized then that buying her had been the smallest part of what he had done. Whatever came next would cost more than $1. It would cost comfort. It might cost safety. As they stood there, facing each other in the open snow, he understood that the silence the town had paid for was already broken. He led her away from the yard and into the narrowing lanes beyond the settlement, where the buildings leaned closer together and the snow gathered in drifts untouched by boots. The town seemed to exhale behind them, relieved to have shed its burden. The cowboy did not look back. He kept his eyes forward, guided by habit more than certainty, listening to the careful cadence of her steps as she followed. Without the metal can, she moved more cautiously, as if relearning balance. He slowed again, pretending it was for his own sake. The wind found them there, threading through the alleys, lifting loose flakes into brief spirals. She drew her shawl, fingers pale against the fabric. He noticed how she kept her chin level, how she did not hunch even when the cold bit deeper. When they reached the small stable at the edge of town, its door half ajar and hinges groaning softly, he pushed it open and waved her inside. The smell of hay and old leather rose to meet them, warm compared to the open air. He set a lantern on a hook and struck a match. Light bloomed, amber and unsteady, throwing shadows across the walls. She stood near the door, hands folded, eyes adjusting. The cowboy shrugged out of his coat and held it out without comment. She hesitated, then took it, slipping her arms into the sleeves with a care that suggested she expected the offer to vanish. The coat swallowed her, heavy and reassuring. She exhaled, a long breath she had been holding. They stood like that for a moment, two strangers sharing borrowed warmth. The cowboy cleared his throat. "You hungry?" he asked. The question sounded clumsy in his mouth, inadequate, but it was the best he had. She nodded once. He rummaged through his pack, producing hard bread and a small tin of beans. He handed them over and turned away, giving her privacy without nomming it. The sound of her eating was quiet, deliberate, as if each bite were a decision. Time stretched, the lantern hissed. Outside, the wind worried at the door. When she finished, she wiped her hands on the hem of her dress and spoke again. "You didn't ask my name," she said. It was not an accusation, it was an observation. He considered the wall, the knots in the wood, then shook his head. "Didn't seem like mine to ask," he replied. She smiled faintly at that, the expression quick and gone. She told him her name anyway, soft enough that it felt entrusted rather than given. He repeated it once, careful with the syllables, committing it to memory. The act seemed to steady her. She leaned back against a stall post, the lantern light catching in her eyes. He noticed then how alert they were, how they missed little. Whatever the town had tried to bury had not dulled her attention. If anything, it had sharpened it. He asked how long she'd been made to wear the can. She shrugged. "Long enough that the silence started to feel louder than noise," she said. The words settled between them, heavy with implication. He felt a flare of anger, quick and hot, then forced it down. Rage would not help her now. Listening might. He nodded, encouraging without pressing. She spoke in fragments, careful not to spill too much at once. A disagreement. A truth spoken at the wrong time, faces turning away. The can lowered like a verdict. He listened, jaw tight, hands curled loosely at his sides. Each piece fit a pattern he recognized, a town protecting itself by breaking someone smaller. When she paused, he did not rush to fill the silence. He had learned long ago that quiet could be a kindness. Outside, a horse snorted. Snow slid from the eaves with a soft thump. Eventually, he said, "You can stay till morning." It was an offer, not a command. She studied him, weighing the words. Trust did not come easily, he could see that. At last, she nodded. He laid out a blanket on a bed of hay, arranging it with an awkward care. When he straightened, she was watching him with a question in her eyes he did not yet know how to answer. Night settled in. The lantern burned lower. He sat on a crate near the door, hat in his hands, feeling the day catch up with him. He thought of the dollar, of how little it had bought and how much it had begun to demand. He wondered what the town would do when it realized she was gone for good. He wondered what he would do when they came asking. She broke the quiet again. "Why did you do it?" she asked. He did not pretend to misunderstand. He took his time. "Didn't like the look of it," he said finally. "Didn't like who I'd be if I walked away." The answer surprised him with its truth. She considered it, then nodded as if placing it among other facts. She slept lightly, breath even but shallow, ready to wake. He stayed awake longer than he meant to, watching the lantern gutter. In the small hours, when the cold crept back in and the wind rose, he added another blanket without waking her. The gesture felt like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He thought then of roads he had taken without looking back, of men he had helped and left behind because staying had seemed heavier than leaving. This was different. The weight here did not press down, it pulled forward. He realized he was afraid, not of the town or its anger, but of failing to meet what this moment asked of him. The fear felt clean, almost useful. He breathed it in and let it sharpen his resolve. In the dim light, he studied her face, memorizing the lines, the way determination lingered even in rest. He understood that whatever had been taken from her, her sense of herself remained intact, guarded like a coal through winter. As the sky began to pale, he rose and stepped outside, scanning the quiet lanes. The town lay hushed, roofs softened by snow, chimneys breathing faint smoke, no alarms yet. He returned to the stable and packed his things with deliberate slowness, sounds measured, respectful of her sleep. He did not know where they would go when day broke, only that standing still would not last. When he sat again, the lantern nearly spent, he accepted the path ahead would test the part of him he had long neglected, the part that listened before acting and learned to carry consequences without turning away. Just before dawn, she stirred and spoke his name. He answered at once. "They'll come," she said quietly. It was not fear that shaped the words, but certainty. He looked toward the door, imagining boots in the snow, voices raised. He nodded. "I know," he said. The truth of it settled over him like a mantle. Whatever voice had spoken beneath the metal had not only broken her silence. It had called him into a conflict he could no longer avoid. Morning did not arrive gently. It crept in pale and uncertain, light filtering through cracks in the stable boards like cautious fingers. The woman sat upright on the blanket, already awake, eyes fixed on the door. The cowboy followed her gaze and felt it too, the tension in the air, the sense that the town beyond those walls was holding its breath. Outside, a distant door slammed. Another followed, sound carried easily in the cold. He knew then that their brief pocket of safety had been noticed, if not yet named. She began to speak without preamble, as if the approaching day had stripped away the need for caution. Her words came measured, precise, shaped by long restraint. She spoke of the meeting in the church hall months earlier, of men seated on benches worn smooth by years of sermons about virtue. She had stood near the back, hands folded much like yesterday, listening as accounts were given that did not match what she knew. When she spoke up, her voice had trembled, but it had not wavered. "Truth rarely does," she said softly. The truth she carried had names attached to it, respected names. Men who shook hands firmly and prayed loudly. She described how the room had shifted, how eyes slid away from her as if she'd broken an unspoken rule. By sundown, whispers followed her through the street. By morning, she was no longer welcome at the town did not argue with her words. It simply decided she would not be heard again. The paint can appeared days later, lowered over her head like a final decree. The cowboy listened, leaning against a post, jaw tight. He remembered those men or ones like them. He had shared drinks with their kind in towns up and down the trail. He felt the familiar discomfort of recognition, the knowledge that silence had once seemed easier than scrutiny. As she spoke, he understood that what she had endured was not random cruelty but deliberate erasure. The town had not punished her for lying. It had punished her for insisting on memory. Outside, footsteps approached, then retreated. Voices murmured, indistinct but purposeful. She paused, listening, then continued more quietly. The can, she said, had been paraded through the streets the first day, laughter ringing sharp against metal. After that, it was worse. Indifference settled in. Children learned to look past her. Adults learned to step around her. She became an absence that still occupied space, a reminder no one wanted. The town had buried its discomfort beneath routine and expected her to disappear. He felt a slow burn in his chest, a heat that did not flare but spread. "They think this ends if you leave," he said. She nodded. "They think it ends if no one remembers why," she replied. The distinction mattered. He realized then that buying her freedom had not undone what was done. It had only shifted if they left quietly, the lie would remain intact, preserved by distance. The thought sat heavy, demanding attention. A knock struck the stable door, sharp and sudden, both of them stilled. The cowboy moved first, placing himself between her and the entrance. He did not reach for his gun. He opened the door a crack. A man stood there, hat in hand, eyes darting past him. "Town's questions," the man said, "not a threat, not yet, just a statement." The cowboy nodded once. "Tell him she's with me," he said. The man hesitated, then left without another word. The door closed and silence rushed back in. She let out a breath she had been holding. "That won't hold long," she said. He knew it. He also knew that stepping aside now would make him like the rest. He turned to her, searching her face for hesitation. There was fear there, yes, but beneath it, resolve. She had not survived this long by yielding at the first sign of resistance. That steadiness anchored him more than any plan could. He asked what she wanted, not what she needed, not what she feared, but what she wanted. The question surprised her. She looked down at her hands and steady. "I want them to say it," she said. "Out loud, I want the truth to have a sound." The simplicity of it struck him. No vengeance, no spectacle, just acknowledgement. He nodded slowly. It was a dangerous want, but a clean one. As the sun climbed, noise gathered beyond the stable. A cluster of figures formed at the edge of the yard, cautious, curious. He could feel the town rearranging itself around the problem they represented. He thought of roads leading out, of how easy it would be to leave before words hardened into action. He also thought of the dollar, of how cheaply the town had tried to buy its peace. He felt something settle in him, a decision made without drama. He stepped outside, boots crunching loud in the quiet. The faces turned toward him, some hostile, some uncertain. He raised his voice, not shouting, just clear. "You want her back," he said. "You'll have to say why you took her in the first place." Murmurs rippled through the group. He felt her presence at his back, steady, unflinching. The lie trembled, exposed to air. No one answered him, not yet. The silence stretched thick with consequence. He sensed the weight of the town's attention, the way it pressed inward, testing. Behind him, she placed a hand lightly against his arm, grounding him. In that touch, he felt the full shape of what lay ahead. The town had tried to bury its truth, but buried things have a way of surfacing. And now, standing in the open snow, neither of them intended to look away when it did. The crowd gathered by degrees, not summoned by bells or orders, but drawn by the quiet tension that had settled over the town like frost. Men stood with arms folded, women watched from doorways, children were pulled back by hands that trembled. The cowboy stood at the center of it, the woman beside him, her posture straight, her eyes steady. The space between them and the others felt wider than the yard itself, stretched by years of avoidance and carefully practiced forgetting. Someone spoke first, a voice meant to sound reasonable. "You made your point," the man said. "She's free now, best thing is to move on." Murmurs of agreement followed, relief masquerading as wisdom. The cowboy listened, then reached into his coat slowly, deliberately. He pulled out the dollar bill, worn and soft, and held it up between two fingers. The sight of it drew the eye like a flame. "This," he said, voice calm but carrying, "is what you charged for your silence." A ripple moved through the crowd, discomfort breaking the surface. He continued before anyone could interrupt. "Not hers, yours, you sold it cheap." The woman did not look at the bill. She watched the faces instead, reading the small shifts, the tightening jaws, the flickers of shame that some could not fully hide. A man stepped forward, one of the respected ones, coat clean, beard neatly trimmed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The woman met his gaze. When she spoke, it was without anger, without pleading. "I said what happened," she said. "You decided it was easier to pretend it didn't." The words landed cleanly, without embellishment, and that made them harder to deflect. The crowd stirred, someone laughed nervously, someone else looked away. The cowboy felt the tension cresting, the moment when denial might turn to force. He did not raise his voice, he let the silence do its work. At last another man spoke, older, slower. "We didn't want trouble," he said. "We wanted peace." The cowboy nodded. "Peace built on a lie don't hold," he replied. "It just waits." The woman stepped forward then, just a half step, but it shifted the balance. "You put the can on me so you wouldn't have to hear," she said. "But you heard anyway, every time you saw me, every time you chose to look past." Her hands were steady at her sides. "I'm not here to punish you, I'm here so it stops." The simplicity of it cut through the murmurs. This was not a threat, it was a boundary. A long silence followed. Snow drifted down, settling on shoulders, hats, the ground between them. The respected man swallowed, his certainty thinning. "Say it," the cowboy said quietly. "Say what you did." The words hung there, heavy. The man's eyes flicked to the crowd, to the faces that had once mirrored his assurance and now reflected doubt. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally spoke. His voice cracked, he named it. The truth stripped of comfort. The sound of it changed the air. It was not dramatic, it was not loud, but it was real. A woman gasped, someone cursed under their breath. The lie collapsed, not with a crash, but with a soft, unmistakable shift. The woman exhaled, a breath she had been holding for months. The cowboy felt the tension ease from his shoulders, replaced by something like grief. This was the cost of honesty, and it was shared now. No one cheered, no one moved to restrain the man who had spoken. The town stood in the aftermath, uncertain what came next. The cowboy folded the dollar and slipped it back into his coat. It no longer mattered. What mattered was that the truth had a sound now, and it had been heard. He turned to the woman. She nodded once, a small, decisive motion. They left the yard together, not hurried, not chased. The town did not follow, doors closed softly. Somewhere a child asked a question and was not answered right away. At the edge of the settlement, the road stretched out, pale beneath the snow. The woman paused, looking back once, not with longing but with clarity. "It's done," she said. The cowboy considered the word, then shook his head gently. "It started," he replied. They walked on side by side, their breaths rising together in the cold. Behind them, the town stood exposed to itself, forced to live with what had been spoken. Ahead, the road waited, uncertain but open. The dollar had bought more than anyone expected. It had purchased a reckoning, and neither of them knew yet how far its cost would reach.